Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter podcast. I am your host, Johnny Mack. Through this podcast, I am on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship as conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack. Today I'm joined by just a wonderful individual. His name is Dan Ness. He's from Minnesota. He loves to hunt in Colorado and all around just great guy. So Dan, thanks for joining us today on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on. So a little history on how Dan ended up joining the show is I am a huge proponent of the military, and I love stories about war, but I also love hearing and reading books about different Navy SEALs and their adventures. And so I was going through a book called Raising Men by Eric Davis. And in that book, it talks about a specific chapter where Eric went to war with a good friend of his, Larry. And Larry Yatch is a buddy of mine. And through talking with Larry, we ended up chatting about the podcast. And he was like, oh, man, you got to get to know my boy, Dan. And Dan's the man. And so from there, we start talking, get connected with Dan, and here we are recording a podcast. So Dan, thanks for coming on the show, man. It's really an honor to have you be a part of the Soulful Hunter and share your wisdom and insight. So first off, tell people a little bit about who you are, where you're from, what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again for having me, and it's awesome that we have a mutual connection through Larry, and actually I know Eric Davis as well, and just awesome guys, and just incredible people to have in your life. And I'm thankful that he recommended me to you, and I'm so excited to be a part of this. So a little bit about me. I born and raised here in Minnesota. Been here my whole life, and like I said, grew up hunting and fishing. I was just fortunate enough to have a dad who took me along hunting from a very, very young age. I think some of my earliest memories when I was, 4 or 5 years old, my dad would take me and my brother out, and then my grandpa was always involved with that as well. So really grew up here hunting and fishing pretty much almost everything and anything that you could go after here in Minnesota. Currently, I just reside west of Minneapolis, a small little town, and I'm an outside sales rep as kind of my day job for a window and door company here in Minnesota called Pella, and so I'm an outside sales rep. So kind of by day, I sell windows and doors, and just kind of the nature of that job is cool because I'm an outside rep. I kind of run my own schedule, so come hunting season, I definitely have the ability to be flexible with my hunting days and working days. And I'm just really thankful and fortunate to be able to do that. So that's kind of my day job. And then I also guide elk hunts out in Colorado. I'm coming up on my 12th season of being an elk hunting guide in Southwest Colorado. I've been guiding out for an outfitter called Colorado Trophies. The owner of that lodge his name is Tom Colander. And I went out there back when I was in college. And I remember I would take my fall semesters off and go guide. I'd make enough money to pay for school and come back and go to school. And I did that for a few years. And then just with the different jobs that I've had, I've been able to continue guiding. So elk hunting and guiding specifically have just been a huge part of my hunting history in my life, and really just kind of took it all to the next level. But back here in Minnesota, I love whitetail hunting. Archery hunting specifically is what I really, really love to do. And then obviously duck and goose hunting and all that type of stuff. So yeah, I've been able to, pursue whitetails and elk and a few other different types of species, across the Midwest and out West a little bit as well. So yeah, I mean, that's a little bit more about me. So yeah.
I love it. It is really cool to hear that you're from Minnesota and you are a whitetail hunter, but you actually guide for elk in Colorado. How did that end up happening?
Yeah, I mean, pretty wild story. I mean, my uncles actually that live in Wisconsin. I remember they'd always gone out elk hunting in Colorado and whatnot. I always remember hearing them talk about it. But basically, the outfitter in Colorado, he has an apprenticeship program where he hires pretty much anybody and really just takes a lot of time to train them in to make sure that they know what their whatever the guide's responsibilities are. He really takes a lot of time to train people in, his when I remember my first few conversations with him, he wasn't really concerned that I didn't have any elk hunting experience. He just wanted to know that I had hunting experience, and he's like, it's actually better you don't have all these habits because I want to teach you and teach you how I elk hunt and teach you how to, basically do everything. So I'm like, I'm game. And that was when I think I was 20 or 21 years old, my first year out there. So I was just game for anything. I'm like, I will literally cook breakfast if I have to, just like whatever I got to do to get out there. So, and in the meantime, from, kind of when I got hired, it was like kind of late summer or actually early summer in Minnesota. And I went out to Colorado in like August. But in that time frame, all I did was read about elk hunting and just understand like, the thermals in the mountains and how the wind works and just like how to call elk. So I got a bunch of elk calls and I started practicing, which is also something I really, really love to do, is elk calling specifically in the archery season. And I just really practiced and, got my skills up over the summer. And when I went out there, he was the owner is like, oh, I actually know, some things about elk hunting. I mean, there's a lot to learn, obviously, but after the first week I was out there, the outfitter ended up having to fire a guide because because he was incompetent or anything, but he had hearing problems, and as a guide, like, you need to be able to hear. And kind of a funny story. It got to a point where we were having to throw rocks at the guide to get him to like respond to us, and we're just like, so anyway, so that guy had to be let go. Well, the owner looked at me and he's like, "Hey Dan, like, I need you to guide next week." I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Like, I've been here a week. Like,
Thrown into
I
the
don't have."
fire.
Oh yeah, you want to talk about that? It was ridiculous. I couldn't. I'm just like, yeah. So I was that guide with a GPS cruising around the mountains, getting lost on my very first morning on like one of the easiest properties we have. It's laughable, and all the veteran guides were just cracking up, like, that's hilarious. And we've all been there, and it's just like, you'll learn a lot this first week. So I mean, it was trial by fire, and I had an unreal experience. I mean, highs and lows. I mean, guiding is like one of the most intense jobs I've ever had in my entire life, from a mental, physical, emotional, spiritual element. It's all things just maxed out times 10. So that's kind of how I got into guiding. And after that first week, I remember saying, I'm never going to guide again. It was just the lows were so low that it was like, and the highs were few and far between. And it's like, you have these hunters there who are paying all this money, and then they find out that you're like the rookie guide, and now they're just questioning your every move, and it
Yep.
messes with you mentally. So I had to just continue to push through. And I remember after that first week, I'm like, I'm never doing this again. Like, after this season, I'm done. And now here we are 12 years later, and it's just like one of the best things in my life. So
It's really interesting, and something that people forget is that you think guiding is these hunters that just know that terrain and know those animals like the back of their hand, but really it's the customer service industry. And
totally.
you got people that are paying a high price to be put on elk, and yet there's always a possibility of not getting one, but at the same time the expectations are very high, and it's the whole pressure is on you.
Definitely. You're basically I've always said this, you're trying to create success in a world where you have control over nothing. And I'm just, and it was an archery hunt as well. My first week of guiding was archery, which is even another level of difficulty. I mean, rifle elk guiding alone is difficult, but going to archery is just like a whole another realm. It's like, we have 80,000 acres, and my job is to get you 30 yards or less to a bull that you want to shoot. Like, you're standing on some of these lookouts, you know, and you're looking over this expanse of just this wilderness. And I sometimes nowadays I'll joke around with my hunter and be like, yeah, my only job is to get you 30 yards within all this country. Like, we'll have a good time doing it. So it's just it's a wild thing. Like you said, it's you're delivering an experience though. And that's what the owner of the lodge that I work, or this outfitter that I worked for, he was always saying, we're delivering a quality hunting experience. It's not just the kill, it's everything all encompassing. So there are days where you're not getting into animals, and it's up to you as the guide to really up the experience and really engage with the hunters and making sure that, you know, they're well taken care of and they're having a good time, and you're, you know, chatting them up with conversation and showing them different things about the mountains. Because a lot of times guys will go on their first elk hunt is typically outfitted, and there's a lot to learn about just even being in the mountains, and, you know, the way the wind works, and the different types of, I don't know, aspen groves or dark timber or elevations. I mean, there's all different types of stuff to talk about. So it's a whole experience that you're trying to relay. It's more than just pulling the trigger and killing an animal. There's so much more to it, and that's what I really try to educate all my hunters on when I'm guiding them. Is like it's more than just the kill. So
Absolutely, and that is why I wanted to get you on this podcast, because hunting is not just squeezing the trigger or sending the arrow. It is everything that it does for your soul, how it provides purpose, passion, how it gives you the desire to train, the knowledge, the growth, and everything it does to just sharpen all of your senses and your knowledge and makes you a better person.
yeah, amen to that. Amen to that. The fitness thing that you just brought up is interesting. I just was thinking of this hunter who's been coming to this outfitter for years now. And the one year he decided he was going to do an archery hunt. He was a rifle guy, and he's like, I'm going to try the archery thing. And he was overweight and out of shape, and he came out archery season and got on bugling bulls, but he just physically wasn't there to kind of make it happen. I think he maybe ended up shooting an elk, but the next year he came back and he was in peak physical condition, and he's just like, this changed my life. He's like chasing bugling elk and in the archery season with a bow and arrow. He's like, that changed my life. And he came back in incredible physical condition and just had success from there on out. And it's awesome to see the impact that it can have on people in that way. I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah, it's finding who you are. This is why I wanted to call my podcast The Soulful Hunter, because it is you looking in your own soul to find out who you are, what you're made of, and how you show up in the world.
Yeah. And going back to that whole thing of just guiding, I think it pours over into hunting as well, as just like the test of it all. And just like you said, finding out who you are. I mean, hunting and specifically guiding, I mean, it like I said earlier, it challenges you physically, no doubt, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually as well. I mean, it takes, like I said, it just maxes everything out. I love the quote of like, you want to find out who somebody is, like take them on a hunting trip. I think that's just,
Never heard that, but that's so true.
it is. You spend 7 days with somebody, you'll find out real quick on the type of person that they are. And that's fun as a guide, because I get to see that week after week after week. I get 2 new hunters every week, and I get to see different types of people and how they respond in different types of environments. It's pretty wild. And same thing with just even hunting with my friends. You get to see the same thing. You're tired, you're up early, you can't control the weather, you can't control the animals, and you're trying to create success in a world where you don't really have any control. And it's like, you find out pretty quick how resilient people are.
Yep, the true colors show through. I actually wrote an article on our website that talks about hunting answering the call to fulfill all aspects of health. So there's 6 aspects of health. So I'm a school teacher, I'm a middle school PE and health teacher, and I teach the 6 aspects of health as like a spoke to a wheel. And you have to have each spoke and taken care of well, because if you're missing a spoke, you hit a bump in the road of life, your wheel's going to collapse, and life's not going to be so smooth. So you got your spiritual aspect, physical, intellectual, emotional, social, and vocational. Those are the 6 aspects of health, and hunting fulfills all of those.
Yep.
Obviously you gotta put you gotta live with the purpose to fulfill. You don't just read a book to read the words, you read the book for the knowledge, right? So
Yep.
when you live life with a purpose, you're able to get a lot more out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Amen to that. I'm tracking with you on that. Yeah, purpose is an interesting thing, and I think, like you said, you have to have all of those components in life to have purpose. And like you said, if one of those rungs collapses or one of those spokes, collapse, like you have the other ones to lean on. But I'm with you on that 100%. And a big part of, I think, kind of circling back to like the spiritual element, and I have to touch on that because that's where it all starts for me personally. As in I just the name of your podcast, The Soulful Hunter, and just I love I love the name of that. But I have to talk about like the start of all of this and this passion, and just kind of the spiritual connection that I have with hunting is a huge is probably the largest component of my journey with hunting. And I view hunting as a gift. I think hunting is something that we're privileged to do. We have certain laws and rights in place that allow us to to have hunting seasons and all of that type of stuff. But it's definitely a gift, and my take on it is it's a gift from God, and He created all of this entire world for us to experience and to live in. So for one, it's my way of connecting with God through His creation, but also I was I don't know if you know who, I'm sure you know who Phil Robertson is, but he's the
Yep.
kind of the main patriarch of Duck Dynasty. And I got into listening to his stuff way back in the day, way before Duck Dynasty was even a thing. I mean, I have his original duck hunting videos on VHS, and I was obsessed with the duck commanders and duck hunting and all that type of stuff. But he would always reference a verse from the Bible, Acts 10:13, which says, "Arise, Peter, kill and eat." And he would always say, taking orders from headquarters. And I always liked that quote and in that Bible verse specifically. But it also talks a lot about us as humans having dominion over animals and the earth and God's creation and being good stewards of that. And so that's like a huge part of my heart with hunting, if not the number one thing, is just being a good steward of what we've been given as a gift, and being good stewards of the land and the animals, and as like I said, as God says, like having dominion over that. That's a huge part of why I hunt. And it's the number one thing, and it's a gift for me. It's something that I think specifically created to do, and I think it lives strongly and maybe not all of us, but I think we all have a passion and a desire to hunt and to pursue and to protect and conserve. I think there's a huge part of all of us that have that desire somewhere inside of us. And I think society and different things make it easy to kind of suppress those natural things. But, I just want to live those things out every day if possible. And I think hunting is such an amazing way for us to explore that and to explore health and all of those different things that you were talking about on the spokes of that wheel. I think it's an amazing gift, and I feel very, very privileged to be able to hunt and to once again have the financial means to go hunt, have a job that allows me flexibility to go do that. And even if I was never able to go on a trip again, if I had to be left with squirrel hunting with a pellet gun, I mean, I would be thankful for that, So
Absolutely.
it's an amazing thing. It's truly an amazing thing. So
Yeah, it was really interesting. One of the things you just brought up right there, and by the way, I totally agree with everything that you just said, is you talk about having dominion over the earth and over the animals and connecting with God and taking care of what we have. And a lot of the times, people who are non-hunters do not understand the concept of you have to kill animals to then help maintain it. They're like, why? Isn't it just going to naturally maintain itself? And one of the things I think is often forgotten is if you, for example, a fruit tree, let's say an apple tree. apple trees are not going to produce consistently year after year and in a healthy manner if you never prune the tree. And you
Mm-hmm.
can't let a garden get out of control until you got to get in there and cultivate that dirt. You got to weed out the plants that aren't good and healthy so that you can maintain a full and healthy crop. Well, the same thing is with hunting, is you got to take care of what we have. And it is us as humans and being connected with our creator and taking care of our earth is cultivating those herds, the animals, and protecting habitat. But at the same time, you know, animals are naturally going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Might as well take advantage of that meat and have that opportunity to get close with God and get close with yourself through the process of taking its life, rather than just letting it get hit by a car or dying out in the woods and never getting to live on in the stories and the memories and honoring that life of that animal through what we do.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree with you on that. And you get that question all the time. It's like, well, you're taking an animal's life. Like, don't you feel bad? It's like my response always, and I think it's different for a lot of people, but my response is like, yeah, absolutely. Like it's a heavy thing to take an animal's life, and it's not something that I take lightly. And nature is a cruel place, and I mean, the best death that an animal will have will be at the hands of an ethical hunter, where it will be quick, it will be ethical, and more often than not, the animal doesn't really know what's going on. I mean, elk are subject to being attacked by wolves and bears and being eaten alive or starving to death in a cold winter. I mean, that's a pretty brutal way to go. And as far as like being involved and life and death, and that's where guiding kind of gets really interesting too, because you experience all of this. But the outfitter I work for, he would always say, in order to live, something has to die. In order for us to
Absolutely, the
have,
circle of life.
in order for us to have life, I mean, look around, I mean, anything you can look at, something had to give its life for us to have life. I mean, if you're going to McDonald's and getting a burger, there was a cow that had to give its life so you could have your double quarter pounder with cheese. If you're sitting in a home, the foundation was dug up in the ground to the smallest grub worms or birds or nesting habitat had to be given up and taken away. Life had been taken for that house to be built. I mean, you could get in the weeds pretty quick on some of that stuff, but it also comes back to this whole representation of what God did for us. And I mean, just as far as something has to die in order for us to have life, and tying it back to the spiritual realm, I think hunting creates this amazing parallel of when an animal gives its life for us to have life. That's what Jesus did for us, so we could have life, and through his blood on the cross. So I think that is something that is just such an interesting parallel that I get to share with hunters and people who otherwise wouldn't even think of something like that. And I love how hunting has this awesome parallel to be able to tell that story as well. So anyway,
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. In order to live, something has to give its life. And as hunters, like, taking an animal's life it's something that requires, I think there's this misconception that we're just a bunch of rednecks just hooping and hollering and just shooting anything that moves. And that just couldn't be further from the truth. I don't have any of my friends, I don't know of anybody in my circle that is even remotely close to that. Everybody I know that hunts is in the line of thinking that we have, where it's a heavy thing, and we're stewards, and we're going to be responsible and ethical. And that comes down to even our preparation to take that animal's life. I shoot my bow every single day. Yeah. And in preparation to make an ethical, very clean, quick kill. And I just feel like that's our responsibility. So
you mean you're not just a cold-hearted murderer? How dare you?
Gosh, yeah, exactly. Oh man, it's funny when people come at you with those types of conversations. It's like, it's easy to want to get defensive with something like that, but I just think it's just lack of education on what we do. I think there's been certain movies and media published as to how we're just, cold-hearted murderers. And I think if someone's willing to engage in a conversation, man, I love that. Especially if they're anti-hunters, like I would rather have the time to sit down with them. If people are going to be shut down to that and just call you a murderer and walk away, well, it is what it is. But for people that are willing to listen, and maybe people who will be listening to this podcast, I hope that we can really send this message that that's not the case. And I would argue that I'm in love with more of these animals more than anybody who claims to be some type of animal rights activist. I mean, I was listening to a podcast recently. I forget where it was, but they were talking about how, all these anti-hunters or people who are animal rights activists or whatever it might be, they're the ones, claiming that they love animals. Well, it's like, I don't see any of those people out in the woods at 5 a.m. hiking up to the top of a mountain and watching all these animals' movements and studying them. I don't see these people out there. And it's like, more often than not, when we're out there hunting, 98% of the time, 99% of the time, you're not shooting or killing anything. You're observing, you're watching, you're scouting, you're learning the animals' behaviors and habits and really learning all about them. And
yeah, you're just enjoying them.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of times, like especially whitetail hunting, I mean, you're really going after one specific animal, or if you're fortunate enough to have a farm where you have a few different mature animals that you're going after, that's awesome. But a lot of times you're watching all kinds of deer and squirrels and different types of animals, and just really you're out there just soaking it up, enjoying it. And someone calls me a murderer, it's like, okay, like, thanks, but that's not the case. And if you're willing to listen, let's have a conversation. If not, best of luck to you. So
yeah. I think we could talk about this forever, and it's going to be one of those things that's going to be a hot topic for hunters for a long time to come. Let's switch gears here for a second. You grew up a whitetail hunter, and you are an elk guide, but you are also a Sitka ambassador. So how did you get connected with them? Tell us a little bit of a story of how you became an ambassador for Sitka.
Yeah, absolutely. So it started. It really started back when I started guiding. I worked for, I think there's this whole movement, and this is a whole another conversation about like getting on a pro staff and all that type of stuff. There's a whole other realm for that type of conversation that I have some thoughts on. But it all started back when I got into guiding. I got connected with a group here in Minnesota called Kruger Farms. They have a website, krugerfarms.com. And they do a lot of online hunting, basically an online website for hunting equipment, fishing, and they carried Sitka, and I think they had Matthews and all the archery equipment, guns, whatever. They had everything. It was like an online version of like Cabela's, but KrugerFarms.com was the website. And I got connected with the owner of the company, Don Nelson is his name, and he's just like, oh, you're a hunting guy, cool, that's awesome. We have we kind of have a guide program, and we have this guides weekend coming up where we host a bunch of guides and we do like a fishing tournament. It was like in up by Alexandria, Minnesota. And as it turns out, I got paired up with a gentleman by the name of David Brinker, who was with Sitka forever. And this was back in the early days of Sitka, like when they were still using different camo patterns. They weren't using OptiFade. OptiFade wasn't even a thing yet. And
the mothwig patterns.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. So me and David actually got paired up to go fishing, and we were in this like guides fishing tournament, and we just had an awesome day fishing and just chit chatted, and then went back to Kruger Farms that night. And I think we were just hanging out playing cards or whatever. And we just kind of hit it off. And at the end of the weekend, he's just like, hey man, like, I mean, we would love to have you as, be an ambassador and all that type of stuff. And you're, elk hunting guide and all that. So we'll definitely get you connected. And I'm like, great. That's awesome. I'd love that. And so from there, that's kind of what really started my journey with Sitka. And as it turns out, about 5 years ago, they created this whitetail ambassador team. And guiding was a big part of my story, and being an elk guide and whatnot. But I mean, more of my time is definitely spent in the whitetail woods archery hunting. And so they're just like, hey, Dan, like we're starting this special team. And I was at an event at this local archery shop here in St. Cloud, Minnesota called Archery Country. And I was at their shop, and they had a Sitka event, and I ended up meeting the whitetail product manager at the time. His name was Bill Neff, and we connected, and he's like, hey, Dan, like you should really be on the whitetail side of things, and basically just kind of transition into, reviewing gear and kind of checking out some of the new stuff that's coming out before it was really released, and giving reviews and all that type of stuff. Just really testing a lot of the new stuff that was coming out. And then Bill Neff ended up moving to Yeti. David Brinker has moved on from Sitka, but I report into Matt McCormick and Chris Derrick is his name. And basically they run the whole whitetail department. And it's just a cool opportunity to be able to, look at all the new stuff that's coming out and give our honest reviews. Like their approach is just so awesome. They're just like, we just want you to be honest with us. Like, go out, beat the crap out of this gear, and then let us know what needs to be better. So that's what's so cool about Sitka to me, is they're looking to everyday hunters to create products that actually are functional for the everyday hunter. They're not, just pushing out tons and tons of product. It's, let's make this product perfect, and then we'll release it and for hunters to use. So it was kind of an interesting round of like just meeting different people and connecting along the way, and just kind of really evolved into this role of being a whitetail ambassador. And it's fun to work some of the shows and whatnot, and talk to all different types of people. And it's awesome. I really, really love it. And the best part about it, it's like, it could all go away tomorrow, and I would still use all of their gear. And I'm a big believer in their company and their process, their product. And people be like, well, you're an ambassador. Of course you're going to say that. But like I said, it's like, it could all go away tomorrow, and I would still love their gear and use it day in and day out. I think it's the best. So I feel very fortunate. I feel very, very thankful and fortunate to have met some of the people along the way, and to represent such an awesome brand. And it wasn't something that I sought out either. It wasn't something I was seeking. I wasn't sending emails to people, bothering them like, hey, can I get on the thing or get on this ambassador team? I didn't do any of that. It was literally, these things just came about through connection and meeting people and having relationships with people. And, that's just ultimately the best way to go about those types of things. And like I said, I feel so thankful for it. It's awesome to be a part of that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's, you never know who you're going to run into in this world, and it's a very small world, and, chain down the line and degrees of separation, and you end up knowing people. So people listening to this podcast, Dave Brinker, he has now moved on to pursue full-time music, and he's like the hunting musician that is well known. He came out with his debut album, Made Out West, which is a great one. And he also, you might know him, this last year during archery season with Corey Jacobson, he actually got stuck by his own arrow out in the woods.
That was a rough deal. I think they, on their one of their elk hunting series on YouTube, they did all of that. And I was pretty blown away watching that whole thing unfold, because it's like, you're always like, how does that happen? And sometimes those weird things just happen, and it's pretty serious too, especially with the broadheads we're using and the cut that he had. It was cool to see Donnie Drake and Corey just jump into action, but they were like just totally calm and just like, okay, here's what we're going to do. This is it. And so you could get in a whole survival training with that stuff and staying calm and just, all that. It was pretty wild experience. We've had that happen to a few hunters on a couple different occasions where I guide and stuff, and it's no joke. It's a serious thing. So yeah, if people need to go check out that video on YouTube. It's pretty wild. And also David's album. It's awesome.
Yeah, super cool. I've been actually trying to get him on my blog series. This is how I hunt for quite some time. He's a dude that has eluded me. So, Dave, if you're listening to this podcast, number one, you got to join us and tell your stories, but also you got to get on my blog series. So,
absolutely.
I gotta just address the Sitka camo. So there's a big push in the hunting industry right now about like
Mhm.
returning back to the roots and saying you don't even need camo. But I will say this, that I actually wear Sitka camouflage and Sitka products, and I freaking love it. Now, is it super high priced? Absolutely. It is worth it to me. But for all of you out there who are public employees, whether you work for the state, the government, or whatever, there's actually a program out of Mill Creek, Washington called Leo Adventures. So it originally stood for Law Enforcement Officer. So Leo Adventures partnered up with Sitka, and you can get 40% off Sitka gear, and that's actually how I get all my gear for when I'm out in the field.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to go about getting it too, and it's you kind of have to look at it. It's like it's a one time deal. Like it's a one time purchase, and you spend all this money on your bow and your arrows and your broadheads and your boots and spending all this money to go on a trip, and it's like the 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 investment on the part that keeps you out there and keeps you hunting should be at the top of the list. Like especially as a whitetail hunter, well, I could go any way with any of their categories, but as a whitetail hunter, I mean, you're on stand all day, especially during the rut. And I was in Kansas this last year, and it went from a rainstorm in the morning to a total northwest wind, 30-mile-an-hour snowstorm within like an hour and a half. And I have the full on Fanatic system, Fanatic jacket, Fanatic bibs, and then all the base layers and whatnot too. But I was comfortable. Like I just was not cold. I wasn't freezing. I wasn't shaking, and I was able to stay out there in the storm and ended up seeing several great bucks. Now I never was presented a shot, but you're out there, and so what keeps you out there is your clothing. So why skimp on that stuff, especially in the elk woods too. I mean, to have functional gear so you can run up and down the mountain and thermal regulate your body temperature by layering systems is a whole nother game changer. It's so funny when I guide hunters in rifle season. A lot of times, most of the archery guys are caught up on that stuff, but a lot of my rifle hunters, have their big orange parkas, and I'm like, all right, we'll see how this goes. We're about to take a 4-mile walk through the mountains, and by a mile in, they're sweating and shedding layers, and they're just, beside themselves, like just hot and really uncomfortable. And I've been wearing the same system the whole walk, the whole entire hunt. And then we stop and glass for a while, and all of a sudden they're freezing cold, and they're putting all their layers back on, taking their backpack off, unstrapping all their jackets to try and warm up again. And this process just goes on and on and on. So
Yep, hot, cold, hot, cold.
Exactly. And it's so awesome to just be able to just cruise around and not really, I can basically, all I have to do if I start getting hot is they have their half zips that go out, their base layers go all the way down to the middle of your chest. And all I have to do is just unzip my jackets, and some of the jackets have pit zips or whatever. And all of a sudden you're dumping all that heat and you're still moving. So you don't have to take time to just rip off all your layers and then put them back on. And it's just, to see it actually work is just, it's amazing what they've done. And a lot of times people are like, oh, it's just a bunch of hype and a bunch of branding, advertising. It's the real deal. It's stuff that I've used since I've started guiding, for 12 years now, and I literally won't go to anything else. It's definitely a game changer. So even from the whitetail perspective, finding a system where you can literally sit all day in a lot of different weather conditions and be comfortable. And in Minnesota here, it gets nasty, December, late season, snow, 0-degree temperatures, and being able to be comfortable and stay in those conditions, especially when in those conditions, that's typically when those mature animals are moving during daylight hours. So, I mean, it's definitely, for me, if you want to have more of that success, it's worth the investment to invest in clothing that's going to keep you out there longer and more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And this podcast, just for all you listeners are out there, we weren't even really planning on diving into the whole layering system and camouflage talk, but it just is a progression of how things go. And I experienced it firsthand back before I was a hunter and I was a huge backpacker. I actually did the entire Wonderland Trail, which circumferences Mount Rainier National Park. And during that hike, it rained nonstop for 5 straight days, and my rain gear soaked through in first 15 minutes, and then you're miserable the rest of the time. And literally, it's just this grind and the mental pressure, and you're like, you're not enjoying this. And even though there is fulfillment in overcoming, there's also pleasure in being comfortable when you're out in the wilderness.
Mm. Oh yeah. Yeah. If you don't, I mean, yeah, if you don't have to, I mean, you're suffering already. Like you're doing this crazy hike and you're outside the whole time. I mean, you're already out in the elements. Like anything you can do to give yourself an edge to be a little bit more comfortable, yeah, go for it. It's worth it.
Yeah, totally.
And
All right, so let's.
I didn't mean to go on a sales rant either on Sitka stuff, but I love this stuff. It's easy to talk about.
It's
It's
easy to talk
awesome.
about for me. I freaking love it as well.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
went out to North Dakota, and I have a buddy out there who hunts, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you're one of those Sitka guys." I was like, "Well, hey man, get on the train because I freaking love it."
Yeah,
He's
absolutely.
the whitetail mossy oak guy.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah. And once again, I mean, I'm not if I have a bunch of my friends who are that way too, it's like absolutely go do your thing. I'm not gonna jam this stuff down your throat, but if you want some education on it, I'm more than happy to help you out. And I let a lot of my friends use my gear and try it out and stuff, and it's like try this on, see how this feels, and shoot your bow with it, and give me some feedback on it. What don't you like about it? And I can bring all that information back to Sitka as well. But it's awesome to see when people go through using it to see their minds. It starts to click. I love that. I think that's just awesome.
yeah. All right, so we got to get into elk talk
Mm-hmm.
right here. Let's dive into the bread and butter of what
Yes.
this is all about.
Yes.
So I'm brand new to hunting. Some of our listeners are brand new, but we also got a lot of experienced people. So we're going to try to cover the gamut and really talk about some good information and good insight when it comes to hunting elk. So let's start at the beginning. And let's talk about finding elk, scouting elk. What are some of the things that helps you go about locating elk, and whether we're talking different elevations and different seasons, and how does that play progress from, whether it's summer scouting into September all the way into that late season, November, December?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the benefit that I have is being in the same area for a long time. I think you can really start to learn an area. So I think ultimately, I think the first step is finding an area that has a lot of access. I think if you it's getting harder and harder with a lot of private land, and I'm all about private land. I'm all about public land. I'm all about both. But I think for most general tag areas where you can get a tag and kind of looking up places in the state where there's going to be larger numbers of elk, and the game and fish departments in most of these states publish all of this information online, and you can see what units killed what type of elk and how many bulls and how many cows, and just calling up the local resource officers in these areas and just ask them questions. They're not hiding any of this information. They'll give you really really good info. So I think that's a good place to start to really kind of narrow down an area and where you're going to go. When it comes to actually once you've decided on an area and just kind of trying to figure out where elk are, summer scouting is, if you have the ability to go summer scouting, that's going to be like the best option. But for like archery, for example, onX Maps is an amazing resource for not only public, private land boundaries, all that, but also topography, road lines, figuring out, where, the farthest distance from a road. They just have so many cool features. It's really changed the game as far as scouting goes. And every year, I try and get into new area as a guide. So in archery season, we do guide a lot on public land as well. And every year, I'm trying to find a different way to hunt a new public piece that I haven't been into, and I go right to onX Maps and start looking for specific things. A couple things that I look for is north-facing slopes because they don't get a lot of sunlight and typically they stay cooler. And in archery season, when temperatures still can get up in the 70s and 80s, the elk are going to bed in those cool areas. And also looking for food sources on those north facing slopes, or maybe just on the other side, back to the east or back towards the west. So anytime I can find a north facing slope with a lot of aspen groves or dark timber, that's going to be something that I'm really going to focus on. And then also you can look right on X if there's meadows and big openings where there's a lot of grass. Elk are grazing animals. They originally were on the plains of North and South Dakota before basically human traffic pushed them up high into the mountains. They were a plains animal, so they're going to be eating grasses and things like that. So when I'm looking at X, I try to break it down and just look at, different topography. And every area and every situation is different, but I think one common theme is aspens, dark timber, meadows, north facing slope. I think those are some of the main things. And most mountains are going to have draws and ravines where you're going to have water access to. So those are typically some major things that I look at. And then just getting out there, really hammering a few different types of those areas. And just, if you're summer scouting, getting up there and scouting and seeing what you can find for sign and droppings and tracks. And if I get into some of these areas and I'm not seeing any type of elk sign, move on. Move on to the next area. Don't spend time up there. Eventually, maybe they could be there at some point in time, but if you're not seeing fresh sign, move on. You'll move on to a different part of the mountain or a different area, find a new spot. Don't get hung up on just, pounding, trying to find new areas that if there's no sign, keep moving. So
right. Don't try to create elk in your mind. That animals need to be there in order for you to hunt them.
Exactly. And so that's kind of how that's in a nutshell. I could go in a much more broad sense. That's kind of how I would kind of summarize all of that. I could get a lot more detailed in some of those things, especially on a specific area. If I had a map I was looking at, I could look at a map and kind of pick it apart and be like, okay, I'm going to check these 2 spots first, or really focus my energy on these 3 spots. If those aren't producing, I'm going to go here instead. So it's all about where you're at and the different types of structure you have to the mountain or whatever it might be. Even flat, if you're out hunting flat alfalfa fields and you're hunting more canyon type of terrain, which is also what we guide a lot in as well, is a lot of the lower elevation elk that are sitting around 5,000 feet, they're hanging out in canyons, but they're coming up out of the canyons and feeding on top of the flats and alfalfa fields, which are all usually private farmers. And then they drop back into the canyons. Whole different ball game, whole different element. Totally different than being up high at 10,000 feet. So there's differences to both. So
yeah, are you finding elk at different elevations based off of different seasons, or are you focusing on specific elevations at any time?
Yes and no. So there are resident herds that stay down low, that stay at lower elevations. They never go up to higher elevations. So resident herds are very predictable because they're hitting the same food sources and going usually to a similar bedding area or a same bedding area, and they stick around there all year long. They're not migrating up to higher elevations. So I would say typically you're hunting higher elevations. I think majority of the elk are going to be up high for archery. And then as you transition into rifle season, as the snow starts getting deep, elk are migrating off the mountains. They're going to lower elevation where they can access food a lot easier. So then that's when you're starting to hunt more kind of your lower elevations around 5,000 to 6,000 feet, specifically where I'm at anyway. But I feel like that's the case for most areas, is elk are going to migrate to lower, almost farming communities and lower lands where the elevation is a lot lower, the snow is not as deep, and they can access food. So I think in rifle season, you're almost hunting that transition area between super high elevation and their winter grounds. You're kind of hunting that transition in between, and watching the elk migrate is one of the most spectacular things I've ever had the opportunity to witness. Seeing herds of hundreds and hundreds of elk migrating through, the properties that I've been able to guide on is something to witness. It is amazing. So that's another fun time to hunt too, because a lot of some of the areas that I get to outfit on or guide on are some of those transition areas. So during rifle season, especially towards the end, as the snow is starting to pile up, it's not uncommon to see a herd of 200 some elk and 25 bulls, and they're all bugling and screaming, and all the cows, and they're just moving through. And you got to capitalize, obviously, because they might not be there the next day. And that's the other thing, is elk can cover ground like you can't believe. So there's a lot of different factors in the time of year. You're 100% correct. You are definitely hunting different areas, but there are those situations in archery season where you're hunting a resident herd at 5,000 feet, or you're doing the normal thing where you're up super high at 10,000 feet, and you have a greater variety of elk to go after. So pros and cons to both.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Do you like to start your mornings out up on ridge tops, or do you like to work your way up through the morning?
Yeah, so archery season, definitely more just moving and calling. Just continuing to call. I don't call. I'd rather have an elk sound off before I start calling. I'd rather have a bull let me know where he is before I start calling, because then I can get in a lot closer to him. Especially if you get out of the vehicle and you're hiking up and you have a bull that's just ripping. It's like, yeah, this is going to be a good morning, because he's letting us know right where he is. We're going to get as close as we can before I even make a sound, because you're just letting that bull know where you are. And I'd rather get super, super close to him and challenge him, or make a cow sound, or whatever the strategy is. I'd rather get to him close. So in archery season, I'm definitely working and trying to get close to him first, and calling and moving and covering a lot of ground. Where in rifle season, it's a lot more getting up on vantage points, because they're not talking as much. They still bugle in the rifle season, but not nearly as much, and if at all. And so I do a lot more glassing in the rifle season, a lot more getting up on high points, and just spending a lot of time glassing, kind of certain areas where there historically has been elk, and just even exploring new areas too, and just trying to find them, because it's going to be more of a spot and stock game in rifle season.
So with rifle, are you not hitting dark timber as much because it's hard? You're not going to be able to glass into that, or how are you going about that?
Yeah, and there are some areas where there is going to be dark timber, even down low, like some of the canyon hunts that we have, or if we're hunting over a canyon, I'll get on the rim of a canyon, and a lot of times it's a lot of pines. So you'll see the different pockets, and the elk will love to bed in those pines, and you can still glass in there. And if you watch an area for long enough, you'll probably pick up an elk moving through there. So, but as far as like the dark timber that's up high, not a lot. Just because, for one, it's up high, you're not going to be able to shoot as far. If you're in the dark timber, it's typically blowdowns and gnarly terrain, and you can really only shoot 20 yards. So in that instance, it's almost a better archery setup, because you're able to call them in and get super close. But for rifle, it's going to be typically lower elevation. The elk are transitioning out of the dark timber, getting into lower elevation. So a lot more wide open country, because being able to cover ground by glassing is going to be a huge advantage, and really save you a lot of energy and time, and really making the most of the time that you have on the mountain, and kind of letting your binoculars do a lot of the walking for you. So granted, I'm still all about, like, well, if you're not seeing anything there, move and get to another point, check that out, and just continually trying to cover as much ground as possible. And so, yeah, in rifle season, yeah, the elk will still be in the dark timber. It's just a lot harder to get up on them, because you're just not going to be able to shoot very far. So I don't like my hunters shooting over 300 yards. There's a lot of guys nowadays with long range setups that are shooting way beyond that. And if you're good at that and you're confident, by all means, but 300 yards or less with a rifle is kind of my cutoff. So that's kind of, if you're in the dark timber, you're really eliminating more opportunity, I would say. So
Yeah.
that's my personal take on it.
So you said earlier that you get out of the truck, you hear a bugle, you're not even making a peep until you're within a certain distance. What do you think about this, the concept of like what the born and raised guys are doing, and the aggressive calling of bugling as you move and just keep going? And then where do you rather just cow call rather than bugle? Just talk a little bit about your take on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, first, the born and raised guys are awesome. I love everything that they're doing, and their series on YouTube is, if you haven't watched it, you need to go watch it. It's awesome. I just love what those guys are doing. They're what do they call it? The Cat Road Shuffle, I think is what
Yep.
they call it, where they're just moving and bugling and getting a bull to respond. I do that tactic as well, especially on mornings when it's dead quiet. If there is nothing going on, you got to do the cat road shuffle or whatever your version of that is, moving and calling, moving and calling. And I'll mix it up between cow calls and bugles, but just trying to get a bull to respond. And once he responds, then it's like, okay, game on. Like, let's get a little bit closer and see how fired up he is. And then as far as bugles and cow calls, it's really dependent on the bull and what's his trigger, because there's a distinct difference between a bull that's just bugling and a bull that wants to come in and destroy you. So it's getting to that level of whatever I got to do, whatever noise I got to make that bull get so fired up that he's going to come charging into 10 yards. So it's really funny. I've had a lot of times you try to make these perfect, crisp, like beautiful bugles with a nice chuckle at the end and maybe a lip ball or something like that. And I've heard bulls get fired up over some of the worst bugle sounds I've ever heard. So it really varies on the elk. And a lot of times that could be even something as simple as you're bugling, and the bull is relatively fired up, but it might take raking a tree and breaking some branches for that bull to just go to a whole nother level and come charging in. So it's very, very dependent on the animal. And that's why I think elk calling and archery is so much fun, because every bull is different. There's not one that's the same. I think you can have similar or kind of consistent tactics on how to get them to respond, but every situation is different. And sometimes I think the ratio in Colorado is like 90% of archery hunters go home empty-handed. Like more often than not, wow. It's probably not going to work out for a variety of reasons. Most of them being the thermals and wind and the bull, getting a whiff of you and taking off before you can even get a shot. But every situation is totally different, and you just have to have every situation's basically you're just trying to solve that problem of like what's going to get him fired up and get him into range, and just pray that the thermals keep coming down and stay in your favor and the wind is in your face. And it's just sometimes you go away from a situation like, oh man, I wish I would have done this, or I should have made this call at that exact moment. And hindsight's always 20/20, and you just you learn from those things and apply them the next time. So yeah. Every situation is different.
You brought up a lot of things that I want to ask right here. So let's start off with raking. Do you ever just walk through the woods and rather rake than cow call or bugle?
Well, it depends on where you are. I think there's an element of that, but where I hunt, there's a lot of places out west. There's a ton of free range cattle, like moo cows, as I call them, not elk cows. Yep. But so a lot of times there's a lot of noise. Those things make tons of noise. They're crashing through the brush. I mean, sometimes, and they're pretty skittish too. They're really fearful of human presence. And a lot of times a whole herd of cattle cruising down the mountain makes a ton of noise, breaks a ton of branches. So the elk are kind of used to hearing a lot of different sounds and trees cracking and whatnot. So as far as locating an animal, it's not going to have the range, for one, because a bugle is going to be able to carry all the way across the next mountain just about, where raking a tree is very, very close range tactic. You'd have to be like right on the elk to start doing that. If I had a visual of a bull who was raking a tree and I was able to sneak in range and I had my hunters up in front of me, I might start raking a tree first to see what that would do and see what that bull would respond with. So it's a close range tactic. So as far as locating an elk, maybe not the best strategy. It wouldn't be my go-to. Like I said, bugling is definitely my go-to, and a loud cow call to just like get that noise out there to really just cover a lot of area and see what responds.
Yeah. Now, I was hunting with a guy this last September where he said he will not bugle until he hears another elk bugle, and he'd rather go locate just with cow calls. And he was using 2 different diaphragms to constantly work the sound of like more than just one cow.
Yeah, absolutely. Another great strategy as well. Sometimes you can do the aggressive bugling and just go that route. And some days I'll just, as I'm walking along, I'll probably bugle. I would do a hybrid because of how far that bugle gets. I mean, a bugle is going to cover a lot more space than a cow call will. So from that perspective, I would do both. I don't have any issue with that strategy. I love that. I think a lot of times I'll just be walking along with a diaphragm, just mewing along and making cow calls and just walking through the mountains. And a lot of times you will literally have a bull just all of a sudden just scream right on top of you. And it's like, oh. And I like to do it when I'm walking, because if you're making a bunch of different cow call sounds, and especially if I have like an assistant guide or apprentice with me, I'll have them, like, if they don't know how to use a diaphragm, I'll have them just like hit a hoochie mama every now and again. And you sound like a herd of elk moving and walking. So that's one of my strategies that I use all the time, is to just, if I don't have a bull responding, along with, doing a bugle every half a mile or every mile, whatever it is, I'll mix it up by, as I'm just moving through the woods, I'll just make a bunch of cow calls and sound like a herd of cows walking through the woods. So, and you're walking and you're crunching on sticks and making noise and stuff. You're not trying to really sneak through the woods. Elk make tons of noise. So if I'm pretending to be a herd of elk and just doing, just a bunch of mews and cow calls, that's kind of the strategy I use. And I wouldn't disagree with that strategy at all. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways to go about locating and finding elk. And I'm kind of like, use it all. And I mean, you have limited time in the mountains, and do whatever it takes to get one going. So if that's just using cow calls, go for it. If that's just doing aggressive bugling or a combo of both, go for it.
Yeah, try to get good with something.
Yep.
Something is better than nothing, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And once again, depending on the area, there's a lot of mornings where I will probably just do cow calls and wait till I hear a bugle before I bugle. But in some instances, like if it's just dead and it's just quiet and you're just having a ghost town type of morning, it's nice to be able to have the bugle to try and get something going. That's just the thing, is like, you just got to get the elk fired up, and whatever that's going to take. Like I said, I would say if you're going to practice something, get a diaphragm and get good at doing bugles with the diaphragm and get good at doing cow calls with the diaphragm, because you can make so many more sounds and all different types of sounds. I also use like Wayne Carlton, like, reed type of calls. Primos makes a ton of different elk calls. There's a lot of different things you can do. I think the diaphragm is the most versatile and the amount of sounds you can make. So I always have one in my vehicle as I'm driving around doing work calls and stuff. I always just practice and, make mews and try to learn different sounds. And so I would say if you're going to get good at anything, it's like get a diaphragm and just get good at making bugles and cow sounds.
Yeah, that's really good. I know my buddies were always like, hey, you got to work your calls on your way to work. That way you're in the car and no one else has to listen to you. And I'm like, damn, guys, I live less than a mile away from work. I don't have much of a commute.
That's true. I used to, back in the day when I was really more into goose hunting and goose calling, like I would do all my goose calling in my vehicle, because it's like, it's so loud and so ridiculous. It just drives people nuts. So I think anything that you can do to, like you said, it's less than a mile, but I think cow sounds are a little bit less aggressive than if you're ripping a bugle in your house. But I definitely think if any time spent doing that stuff is going to help, and especially in the mountains, when you're out in the mountain for a week or whatever, doing it all day every day, you're going to get good pretty quick. I mean, you're just using it a lot. So.
And at the end of the day, you don't have to make a perfect sound to still get an animal to respond, right?
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Like I said, some of the bugles that I've heard some other guides make that get a bull fired up. It's like, poof, like that doesn't sound like Corey Jacobson. Like that's not gonna call an elk in, and it does. So I think elk they're a lot smarter now than what they ever were. I love how that movie, The Linguistics. I don't know if you saw that one by Sitka, with Corey Jacobson and Larry Jones and all these guys. I just thought that was such an awesome video, how they talked back in the day and how like you could honk the horn on your car and a bull would bugle back, and I just think that back in the day it was probably a lot easier than it is now, and being proficient is a good thing. I think the main thing is being able to make a variety of sounds. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be championship level, but I think being able to do it and make a lot of different sounds, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I think the better you are, it's gonna pay out in the woods for sure.
Oh yeah. Okay, so that brings me to my next question that I really been trying to wrap my head around, but it's nice to talk to somebody with a lot of experience. So in the state of Washington, if you want to hunt bull elk on the east side of the Cascades, it's a special permit. Otherwise, you can hunt spikes and cows. And if you are hunting on the west side of the Cascades in the state of Washington, you can hunt bull elk. So if I was gonna hunt Eastern Washington, just cows, possibly spike, how am I gonna go about hunting them differently than the whole concept of hunting bulls and your bugling and all that type of thing?
Well, you could lump spikes and bulls into the same category because a spike is essentially a young bull, and I call in spikes all the time. And it's just like in Colorado, you can't shoot spikes. There's an antler restriction in the state of Colorado, so it has to be a legal bull in any unit. So spikes, you can call in spikes all the time. I've actually, one of the nastiest, gnarliest bugles I ever heard came from a spike. And it's like, what is that? And then I've heard a spike make cow sounds. And then all of a sudden you hear the sticks cracking. I'm like, my hunters are at full draw. And all of a sudden he steps out and it's a spike. It's like, what? So, and maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was a giant bull just behind him or something, which is very likely as well. But it's one of those things where spikes are perhaps more easy to, and I can't say for Washington, but and calling it an elk, I should never say it's easy. Let me retract that statement real fast. But they're just less educated. They're less intelligent. They
don't have the years of experience.
Yeah, they're basically a young teenager that just wants to kind of be around and hang out with everyone. So as far as calling in a spike, they're going to be pretty responsive normally. So cows, I've had cows respond to bugles. I've had cows respond to really well to like calf calls. If you can learn how to do a calf call on a diaphragm, I think that's a really effective tool for a cow elk. Because you'll get the cows mewing, and that's a huge component of trying to get after a cow. Also trying to get a visual on a cow elk. I think if calling them in is a little bit harder, it can be done. I think spot and stock is probably the route I would go. Once I've located a cow, I try and get close and then try some mews and some calf calls and see what they do, especially if a cow is by itself. Any elk by itself you'll be able to observe or whether or not they're responding. So as far as that goes, I would still try a lot of the same tactics, especially for a spike. Definitely a lot of the same things. And I wouldn't, if I'm going after a spike, I might not make the most aggressive bugle of all time because you very well could intimidate him to the point where he runs off. So, because a lot of times when you're doing these lit balls and these super aggressive bugles, you're going after a herd bull that's like, I'm of equal size, of equal maturity, and I'm coming to fight you. Well, if you're the biggest, baddest bull with your bugle and you're going up against a spike, that spike potentially could freak out and take
right,
off.
I'm out of here.
So that's where it's like, if I'm going after a spike, it's probably, which I can't really, but if I'm bugling, if I were to bugle towards a spike, I would do some I don't know, less aggressive bugles and cow calls and just see what happens, especially if you're kind of right in the rut with archery. You do have a lot of spikes that you do call in, and in Colorado it's pass, like don't shoot the spike, like let him go, and here comes the bigger bull behind him or whatever it is. So I guess to kind of answer your question, similar tactics, just changing up some of the bugle stuff with a spike, and then really going after the cows with calf calls, and seeing what can get them talking and seeing how they respond. Once again, every situation is different and every elk is going to react differently.
Right. That's very good insight right there. What about late season? You're starting to get into like November, mm-hmm. and maybe even some seasons if they're open all the way into December. Mm-hmm. Are elk talking much at all, and can you get them to talk at all?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, elk will bugle all year round. So elk it's not something specific to the rut. It's just way more in September during the rut. I've had elk bugle all year round, and I've actually had really good success with calling in elk in the rifle season, like in a November season, not with a bugle, but just with a cow call. And it started off with visually spotting the elk first and glassing them up. And it's like, yep, shooter bull. Like it's a legal bull. We can get it. And watching them in my binoculars, and then doing one of my super loud cow calls, which a lot of times I'll do a cow call on a diaphragm through my bugle tube to get extra volume. Or I'll use like one of like a reed type of call. Usually the reed type of calls you can get really loud too. But if he's 500 yards off, I'll just do some super loud mews and see what will get him to respond. Especially if I'm watching him through my binoculars, I've had him pick up their head and look, and then put their head back down and start feeding. And then I'll hit my cow call again, and he'll pick his head up and look, and then go back to feeding. And as long as he can hear me, you have a chance. So if he's not moving, like, we'll move to him. But in that instance, I've had a lot of different scenarios in rifle season where I'll make a loud cow call, and all of a sudden, like, I'll be watching the bull, and he'll turn and just come on a line right to us. And I've called up elk to 20 yards in rifle season. So just by using a cow call without any bugle whatsoever. So maybe.
Do you think some of that has to do with, like, a female's only going to be hot that one time a year, and therefore she's not going to want any action, but a guy's a guy, and a guy's always trying to get some?
No, not as much in the rifle season. I maybe like towards like the beginning of rifle season, but I mean, elk are typically, I mean, they're rutting, pretty much only 30 days out of the entire year. And I think it's more or less based on being a herd animal. And a lot of times some of these bulls that are by themselves after the rut, they're kind of trying to, build their harem basically for the wintertime. And I think a lot of times elk are herd animals, and they're going to want to be with a herd. So if I'm mimicking a herd of cows, or at least, and a herd could be 1 or 2 cows. It doesn't have to be 30 cows. It could just be 1 cow. And that bull is, well, I'm going to be with that cow because our chance of survival is a lot higher than if a bull is just out there by himself. So I think the nature of them being herd animals is a way to attract them, as well as what you're saying, and just males being a male bull. I mean, that definitely could play a role as well. I'm not saying it's one way or the other, but I think in the later seasons, it has more to do with herd dynamics than it does mating.
Yeah. So ultimately, it doesn't matter what time of year it is. You better go out in the woods with a cow call if you're hunting elk or looking for them.
Definitely. I will never go into the elk woods without my bugle tube and diaphragms and reed calls. I bring, anytime I'm going out, rifle, archery, doesn't matter. I'm always bringing my calls, because there's going to be that time where it's like, oh man, I wish I had a call right now. It's like, that should never be a thing. You should always have an elk call.
Yeah. What is one of the plays in which you really like? Let's say you locate a bull, you don't know where he's at. He's somewhere. What's your step? Are you trying to think about how the wind is playing on the opposite ridge or down in the draw, or are you more in the moment, or how do you relate that to your hunters and all that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm assuming that the bull is bugle. Let's just say the bull is bugling, and I've got a pretty good idea of where you're never going to know exactly the spot he's standing, but it's like, okay, I could locate him within like a 30-yard area. And it's kind of funny sometimes when a bull bugles and you're in the mountains and it echoes in, let's say, in the dark timber, it's kind of hard. You got to, hopefully he goes off again, because then you'll be able to really get a good location on it. But I'll sometimes look back at my hunters and be like, did you hear that? And where do you think that sound came from? And my hunters it's almost always, each one of them will point in the totally opposite direction. It's like, okay, well, we're going to go where I think he is. So that's definitely part of it. But especially if you're trying to make a plan to get set up and you're getting close to them, my main thing is the wind. That's what I always am. I have my wind puffer out, and I'll go through one of those puffers like every 2 days, because it's like you're always I'm just puffing on that wind checker all the time. That's my number one thing. As soon as a bull bugles, it's like, check the wind. Okay, like thermals are still coming down. They're going to be probably, the thing that's nice about the mornings are a little bit easier to predict, because the thermals in the mountains are always coming down. So the cold air is always coming down the mountain. So even if you have a predominant wind, you can always rely on that downward draft. So that's something that it's like, okay, the bull is uphill from us. It's still early enough. The sun hasn't hit this side of the mountain yet. So as soon as the sun starts warming up that side of the mountain, that's when hot air starts rising. And that's when you start getting those swirling winds. So the sooner or the earlier in the morning, the better, when you have that more consistent downdraft coming down the mountain of those thermals. So that's the first thing I do is first step, check the wind, and then figure out what's the best way to get to him without him seeing us, and see if we can be, I'm not really trying to be quiet, but I'm not like trying to make all the noise in the woods either. It's like, let's see how close we can get and still yet be kind of stealthy and close the distance while keeping the wind, because a lot of times you can blow it if you're not checking the wind. You could be making your way right to him, and if you don't check the wind, you could ruin it before you even have a chance. So checking the wind, and if possible, I'm going to try and cut that distance straight to the elk as quickly as possible. If I have to make a different route, then, plan that out, but just try to close the distance and check the wind is by far my number one thing that I do every time.
Man, that is bringing me back. Hearing you talk right now is bringing it back to this last September, where I went on my very first archery elk hunt, and I heard for the very first time a bugle.
Yes.
And it shook me. I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible.
Yes.
But what you've said right there is that when you've heard a bugle and you've been with other hunters and you're like, hey, where'd that bugle come from? And everyone points in different directions. That is real.
Yes.
I was with two people in the woods and we all pointed in different directions. And I was like, how is it that you think this came from that direction? I heard it over there. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think a lot of it from my personal experience, some of the guys that I've guided are generally older men. So, there could be a hearing issue that's causing some of that. But when I'm with my hunting with the guys that I guide with, like, we're all pretty in tune on where it comes from. Sometimes it's like, within like a 45, if we're all looking out at the mountain, it's like within a 45-degree angle. It's pretty rare that when I'm with the guys that I guide with that we're so far off. But there has been times where it's like, whoa, like, no, it's way over here and you're going over here. Like, what are you talking about? It's a big thing that I have to do is, I just trying to get in an area where you can hear really good. Because a lot of times if you're in the trees and there's some wind, it does get really hard to hear. And you eventually you could stand there for a long time trying to figure it out, make a move, like move in a direction that you think, and you'll find out pretty quick if that bull is bugling, and all of a sudden it's all of a sudden in a different spot. It could very well be a different bull, but it's more than likely you're going the wrong way. So you'll figure it out.
I like that.
You'll figure it out.
Action is better than no action.
Exactly. Make a move, because that bull is more than likely on the move, and the longer you stand there, you just really lose the initiative, and you just got to get going. So make a move. If you're wrong, turn around and go the other way and get on them. So
yeah,
that's what I would say.
That's really good insight. I think more often than not, people get caught up in their own heads of what they should do rather than living and being in the moment. And I think that's a part of like why I wanted to do this Soulful Hunter podcast, is like, life is now. Do it, live it. You're going to learn from anything, whether it's right or wrong. So go have an adventure.
Absolutely. Especially as a new hunter. And I love what you're trying to do here, and just to like educate people and really, really kind of bring this out of people. Just kind of, like you said, being this soulful hunter mindset, and this idea of that, and just, it is now. Like, go, like, do it right now. And especially if you're younger or older, whenever it is, like, I talk to guys who are in their 70s that I've guided, and they're just like, man, I wish I would have done this when I had my legs and I could walk and move, and not to get all doom and gloom, but man, nothing's guaranteed. And, as quickly as you can run up and down the streets, that could be gone, in a short amount of time. Or, even a few years. So if you have the ability to get out and get after it and go do it, I would just encourage anybody, go give it a shot, go try. And especially with elk hunting, you're going to learn. And I learn as long as I've been guiding, which, I mean, there's guys that have been doing it way longer than I have. And every time they come in, they're like, man, I learned something new today, and I really got my butt kicked by the elk. And I'm still learning. It's a continual learning. You never max out, and you'll never achieve full understanding of an animal, whatever it is that you're pursuing. There's no way. And I think that's the part of hunting that is so great, is the pursuit and just the continual chase and the continual learning and the continual practicing. It's never ending. And I think for me personally, I love the chase, and that's why I think guiding is such a great fit too, because when you get an animal, it's bittersweet. The chase and pursuit is over. And as a guide, I get to take my other hunter and go out the next day, and then I have new hunters coming the next week. So I get to continually chase and pursue these animals. And ultimately you want success, and you want to fill your tag. But just the continual drive to learn and to understand and to know these animals and to have success is it's unending. And I think that's why it's such an amazing thing that we get to do.
Yeah, it can be a drug, the natural high of life. You're just constantly pursuing that adventure and that fuel that gets you going each day.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about this. Let's talk about guiding business for a second. And I don't want to take this too far and too long, but there's a lot of negative around outfitters and how you better make sure you read reviews and get good information on how an outfitter is and how their guides treat their customers and different things. Have you heard stuff like that being in the industry?
Oh, absolutely. All the time. Yeah, I feel very fortunate to work for an outfitter who is just an outstanding guy, who is just the most ethical, the most respectful, responsible. I mean, his morals and values carry over into his business, and he's got a great relationship with the game warden and all that type of stuff. I mean, it's just finding people like that is harder and harder in the outfitting realm. So it's an interesting thing. And I have people ask me all the time. It's like, I'm looking at outfitters, like, what should I look for? What questions should I ask? I think the main thing is just finding guys that are legitimately basically selling and how do I say this? They're basically advertising and selling basically the right expectation. Like they're not posting pictures of giant bulls, and then you show up there and it's like, there hasn't been a giant bull here in 50 years. Like that's just not, so really managing expectations is good. And I think good outfitters do this really, really well. They undersell and over deliver is really a good philosophy to really find with an outfitter, is find a guy who's, relatively humble, like, and not showing you the biggest bulls and, we killed, this and this. And, I've been at a lot of sports shows with the outfitter that I work for, and just seeing how he interacts with customers is he has pictures from every single year, especially the most recent one. It's like, here's all the elk that we shot in the fall of 2018. And here's all the mule deer that we took in 2018. And then I can go back and here's my album for 2017, 2016. And just like having that history and like really laying that out, I think, and you can find a lot of this on a lot of websites. A lot of websites will have photo albums from the previous fall. And then also look at the pictures. It's like, are these different guys, or is this all just the same bull, just in different shot angles? You can do a lot with some photography trickery these days. But I think a big thing is just that builds a lot of credibility. Opportunity and success rates, I think, are important things to look for as well. Is success rates and opportunity rates are totally different. A success rate on an archery hunt could be, for an outfitter, 30%. You're like, well, that's not very good. But what's your opportunity rate? Well, define opportunity. So the way my outfitter defines an opportunity is a bull of your choice at 30 yards or less. And so the opportunity rate is 80%. Success rate's 30% because crazy stuff happens. I've had guys shoot the dirt right in front of their foot when a bull is screaming in their face. I mean, that's an opportunity, but the hunter was not able to capitalize. So
Yep.
Success rates and opportunity rates, that's another thing to look at. Like I said, the pictures, and then references is the next thing that I would go to, or I would say these are kind of the three things that I would look for as far as if you're looking to book a hunt. And budget aside, these are the things that I would always ask about is, do you have testimonials of guys from last hunting season, not from 5 years ago? I want to talk to guys who were here last fall. And then if you're going archery, I want to talk to a guy or several guys who were here in archery season. And then I want to see your pictures from last fall, and then success and opportunity rates. Those are the things that I would really discuss, because I think you can get misled, and there's a lot of guys that are looking to make a quick buck, and they'll sell you really fast. I mean, they're trying to make a business as well. And so I think the more information you have, I think you're going to make a much better decision on choosing the right outfitter. And yeah, sometimes you make a mistake and you go with something that's just like not what you expected, but that will help you learn for the next time. But hopefully you can avoid that by utilizing some of these tools to get more information on the front end before you book a hunt.
Right. Well, it sounds like they can be really used car salesmen. Mm-hmm. The bait and switch tactic. But I really love your concept of, I want to see pictures from last year. Mm-hmm. I want to know what last year you took. Mm-hmm. I was on an outfitter's website here in the state of Washington, and you could tell they were pictures not even taken with a digital camera.
Right. Yep.
It's like, okay, well, I mean, obviously you want to honor that animal, but to an extent of business, it's like, well, the game has changed from 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. The terrain is not the same terrain you're going to be hunting. Things have grown up, things have been cut, there's fires, all sorts of stuff.
There, and now with technology, and you have a camera in your pocket at all times with your phone, it's like there's no reason you shouldn't have high quality photos, and not even just high quality, but just like updated photos. Like, it's really easy to grab a picture, even if you're not setting the animal up and making a nice picture. It's like you can still take photos. So I think nowadays most guys are getting up to speed with that stuff. And you can also tell by if they do have pictures, and a lot of the pictures are like, look at the equipment that guys are using, look at the camo they're wearing. That also gives you a good indication of like, are these updated photos? So, if a guy is out there and not to say that guys aren't still using old equipment, that's not what I'm saying, but it's nice to see guys that are shooting, the latest and greatest archery equipment, and they're, wearing new Sitka or whatever brand it might be. It just adds more credibility. So there's more things that you can look at, and you're able to gather a lot of information from even photos. So,
right. So like if I was working out in the gym and I saw a guy listening to a Walkman cassette tape player while he was running on the treadmill, I'd be like, what the heck is going on over there?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there might be a little bit of a cool aspect with it, but at the same time, be like, wait, is it 2019?
Yeah.
What's happening?
Exactly. So
Can people get an over-the-counter tag with you in your outfitter?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. Archery is all over the counter. There is a trophy unit that's next door that you do have to have. I think a non-res, you would draw, it's like 17 or 18 points. It's pretty high. But yeah, there are general tags available in archery, and then there are general tags available for rifle too. But you'd have to get on the website and talk to the outfitter that I work for. He'd be able to provide you with all those details on what dates and rates and all that type of stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, and where can people find you at? How can people get a hold of Dan Ness or get him to guide them on a hunt?
Yeah, absolutely. So my Instagram is probably what I'm most active on. I do have a Facebook page. You can just look up Dan Ness in Minnesota. But my Instagram is D_Ness247 is my Instagram handle. So if you want to send me a message on Instagram, that's, like I said, I'm most active with that. If you want information on the outfitter that I personally guide for, and if you want to request me as your guide, you can certainly do that. The outfitter is coloradotrophies.com. And that's, so www.coloradotrophies.com. and they have an awesome website, and they have all the information, dates and rates, and all that type of stuff on there as well. So you could request me as your guide there. Yeah, so that's pretty much how you get a hold of me. And if anybody has any questions about elk hunting, send me a message on Instagram. I'm more than happy to answer questions, or if there's different discussions that we've talked about here today that want to go a little more in depth, I'm more than happy to have a phone conversation. And I love talking about elk hunting or whitetail hunting or duck and goose hunting, whatever it is. I enjoy it all. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions or help anybody out. So.
See, this is what's cool about you, Dan, and what I love about people in the hunting community is that you're not just an ambassador for Sitka, you're an ambassador for hunting.
Mm-hmm.
You are somebody that stands tall and proud for hunting and is a great advocate and someone that we can look up to and go to for information and help. And I really want to commend you on that. Thank you.
Man, I appreciate you saying that. I just love it. And when you're passionate about something, it's just like, I don't ever want to, I'm not a know-it-all. I don't have all the answers, but I definitely appreciate you saying that. And I think that more people to stand up for good things and things that are right in this world is definitely what's needed, and be bold in that for sure.
Yeah, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so Dan, before we wrap this all the way up, man, I gotta know, what has hunting taught you about yourself, and what has it done for you in your life?
Man, that's a really, really good question. That might be longer than a quick answer, but what has it taught me about myself? It's really developed. I mean, just even from there's just so many aspects to it that really have developed me into the man that I am today, especially through guiding. I would say guiding was a huge, and has and will continue to be a huge component of that. It really shaped my life. For one, it drew me closer to God, and really took my faith in God and my relationship with Him to a whole nother level. So that's a huge component of it. That's the biggest component of it. But I think it's really developed skills of how to communicate with people, how to lead people, how to encourage and teach and educate people. I just think all of these things that you use in everyday life, hunting has just basically developed those skills to just a whole nother level that I never even thought possible. And it's just, hunting has impacted more areas of my life than just hunting. And especially even in the business world, a lot of my customers and clients are, C-level executives and business guys, and to be able to learn how to communicate and have conversations with all different types of people in all walks of life, and really learning about people and learning how to just serve other people is something that guiding specifically in hunting has really taught me. So that's how it's really shaped and changed my life. I think the things about myself is just how to pursue and persevere and just to never quit. Especially elk hunting and hunting whitetails. There are days when it is frustrating and you're doubting yourself and you're just like, I should not even do this. But you just keep pressing forward and you just don't quit, and you learn from your mistakes. You're going to fail, you're going to screw up, but you just keep going forward. You keep learning, you keep educating yourself. And if you continue to do that, not only are you going to be a better hunter, but you're just going to be a better person, and you're going to be able to serve people much, much more effectively in this life.
Absolutely. Life's all about giving. No risk, no reward.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. Well, thanks for coming on and talking everything hunting and giving some great insight on elk for this coming season, everyone. Thank you so much, Dan. We really look forward to connecting with you and hearing how you do this coming fall. So, ladies and gentlemen, don't be afraid to reach out to Dan to get some more insight and really pick his brain. He has a world of knowledge and information. We could have kept this conversation going for hours, but out of respect for Dan and who he is, we cut it short. But thanks so much for this opportunity, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and let's stay in touch. And I'm excited to hear about your upcoming season and all the things that you got going on too.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com and be sure to follow the podcast as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful.